Good morning. We're going to see this topic today. So we're going to see two tenses together. Let's choose. All right, so we're going to see perfect tense. So it says before we park our car here, we had collected the ticket. So we got it before, right? Before we parked, we got the ticket. Next one. Where we see the typo, it's because. Right, so she failed the exam because she spending, well, it's a continuous tense, but it's a past perfect continuous tense. So because she had been spending too much time out watching TV. So we have a consequence why she failed the exam. So this happened first, right? She had been watching too much TV. That's why she failed the exam. Same again, we have a result, right? The street was wet. And why? Because it had been raining continuous, but in past perfect tense. It had been raining, that's why the street was wet. And we have a cause and a result. Next one. All right, so we have, again, a cause and then a consequence. She hadn't No, the contraction here, perhaps not, hadn't. So she hadn't eaten anything since the morning. That's why she was really hungry. We have a cause and a consequence. Next. Right. The roads were blocked in the morning because it had been snowing all night. No, it had been snowing all night, and that's why the roads were blocked in the morning. No, a cause and a consequence. Next. Right. I I had been there when they came. I had been there when they came. When they came. No, when they came, I had been there. Cause and consequence. Next. Same here. When the phone rang, she had been reading a book. So she had been reading a book when the phone rang. This was happening, and then the phone rang. Next one, we had been traveling, right? That's the correct form of the verb. That's why it was in the verb. We had been traveling all day. No, this is what that's something that it had been happening all day. And then they're mentioning they needed to rest, not because of this, because they had been traveling all day. So, result of that, they needed a rest. Next one. She wasn't tired at all because she had been sleeping all day. And we can put it the other way around. She had been sleeping all day. So this had been happening all day, right? She had been sleeping. That's why she wasn't tired at all, no? Because she had been resting. And because of that, she wasn't tired. And last one. All right, so it says, I told you that he had taken. I told you that he had taken my money from the table. No, that's just um, past perfect, right? It's not something that happened in continuous. It just happened one time. All right. So before we continue, really quick, let's take a look to our past tense review. All right, sorry, it's not working. So let me just explain this topic. Sorry for that. I'll jump to the explanation. All right, so let's start with a question. So, had you been sleeping all night? Well, it's really in the morning, right? It's 7:19 right now. 7:19 a.m. Had you been sleeping all night? So this is talking about if this has been happening, no? All night. That's why we have the continuous. It's progressive. So the proper answer is yes, I have. Oh no, I haven't. Right? That's the short answer. And we all probably have been sleeping all night, right? So that's the perfect continuous. No, it's a tense that something that happened in the past until a specific time, no? But is in progress. And this is going to focus on the continuation of an action and not the end result. So, for example, she arrived at 10. I've been waiting for 3 hours to hear the record. This had been happening for the last 3 hours, right? And it's something that was in progress. from a specific moment in the past, right? And then it's mentioning that she arrived at 10. What we mostly care about this, we have a progress. Something happened and then we have something else as a result. That's how the game was going, right? All right. So she had been waiting for 3 hours, or they had been, Tony had been waiting for 3 hours. So she started to wait at 7, and then 3 hours later at 10, Teddy arrived. So again, we have two situations, something that was in progress, which is this one, and then something else happened. Something that is important to notice is with continuous tenses, we don't use non-action verbs. For example, know is not an action verb. So saying Johnny had been knowing, it's incorrect. This is a non-action verb. No, we've seen this before. But waiting, it's an action verb. So this is correct. Okay, so what's the form? We have had, because it's perfect tense, and then being. We use being with all the past perfect tenses. No? Had been, and then the verb plus the ing. For example, I just found out that Dean had been, no? And then the verb is lying, lie, and ending ing. No, that's the continuous. And the whole time. No, they had been, or he had been lying the whole time. And obviously, we need contractions with just with the pronouns, right? So instead of saying, if we already mentioned the name before, the second time we could have said he been lying, right? So we need contractions. Or maybe someone else was lying. Maybe she'd be lying, or I'd be, or you'd be lying, right? So we always use contractions. And the contraction for a negative statement is hadn't, right? So also we can say maybe Jackie hadn't hadn't been lying. Who was lying? Being lying, right? So the contraction for negative statement is hadn't. No, it comes from had not, and we use had been with all the subjects. It won't change. For example, another example, he hadn't been practicing with the team, right? He hadn't been practicing. Again, last time, hadn't been, right? And the verb with ing, no, hadn't been plus the verb ing. Continue. All right, so if we want to introduce in a specific time in the past, we're going to introduce it with by. It could be a time or it could be an event. So let's take a look to some examples. So for example, by 10, I had been waiting for 3 hours. That's what Tony said, right? By 10, I had been waiting for 3 hours. So we introduce the by, we introduce a time with by, or it could be the other way around. No? I've been waiting for 3 hours by 10. And this is also very common with the past perfect continuous. We show a relationship with another past action, like we've seen in the game. So the action that was happening first or had been happening first is the past perfect continuous. And the second action that it usually shows a result, it goes in simple past. So for example, I just found out that Dean had been lying the whole time. And so this was been happening the whole time, right? It had been happening. He had been lying, and this person just found out. No? So this is like a result. No? First, this had been happening, and then this is a result. So because they lied to them before, at some point they realized about that. No, they realized they were lying. So and then just they found out. Another example, it was late when Talia finally arrived. Tony and I had been waiting for 3 hours. So it said that she arrived at 10, right? So, but he had been waiting the whole time. No? And then Talia showed up 3 hours later. They had been waiting for 3 hours, and then Talia finally arrived. No? All right, so that's another topic. Sorry. So that's a past perfect continuous. Let's practice a little bit more. All right, we're gonna see another game. This is a short one, so we might understand a little bit better the logic here. So let me get into the game. 1 second, please. All right, let's start. So let's see the difference between past perfect and past perfect. So they had been playing or had been played. All right, so they had been playing. Not this had been happening. They had been playing in the whole day, and then the rain started. Next one. By 2017, she All right, by 2017, she had traveled all the world. She had traveled. Next. Okay. So the correct option was or is they had been thinking about a new house for a long time before they actually bought it. So this happened, this had been happening, and then they bought a new house. All right, so I was late to class and they had started without. So this is just uh, same thing. No? One thing happened first, and then the other one second. So they had started the class, and then you were late for the class, right? They started the class without this person before it arrived. Let's see the next one. By 2006, she. Right? By 2006, she had been singing in the school band for 5 years. Um, why not has? Because this is past, no? And we don't change it for the past. It can't be present, no? It's past. No? They're describing this because it's already happened. So it's the past. Next. All right, when I saw him, we don't use the participle alone, right? This the participle is just with um, perfect tenses. So have, had, has, not alone is not used. So that's why it's always just simple past. When I saw him, he had been working on the project all day and he looked tired. It's past, no? So that's why it's had and not has. And obviously has been is incorrect. All right. By the time she was 28, she had tried different career paths. She had tried different career paths. They they had what? They have what they had. All right. So they had been thinking about the problem itself. No, this was in continuous in the past. They had been thinking about the problem for a long time before they came up with a good idea to solve it. So the first idea happened first, and then they came up with an idea. Mm, it's had because it was happening, right? It had been in the past. That's why it's not has. And it's not come up because it's past, no? So come is present. Came is past. Came up. All right, so let's take a look to the next one. It's also going to show the difference between these two tenses, which are very different, very similar, but different at the same time. Let me show this next one, please. All right. Sorry, 1 second, please. I'm going to fix this out. All right, so Mike. It says Mike. What's the correct option here? Had been visiting or had visited? It says Mike. Let's try with two options. Mike had been visiting his friends before he went abroad for 2 months, or Mike had visited his friends before he went abroad. What do you think? Which one is correct? I think he just had visited. No, he had visited his friends. So it's just past perfect. No? It's not something that happened in continuous. Okay, next. Paul had been repairing his car for 2 days before he called the mechanic, or Paul had repaired his car for 2 days before he called the mechanic. And here, because we have 2 days, it should be continuous. She had been repairing his car for 2 days. And then he went to the mechanic before. Then he called the mechanic. Sorry. Next. So it says Pamela had been dancing for 2 hours before her boyfriend arrived, or Pamela had danced for 2 hours. before her boyfriend arrived. So should be had been because for it says for 2 hours. For this period of time, she had been waiting. No, dancing. Sorry, and then her boyfriend arrived. No, this had been happening, and then her boyfriend arrived. Next. So Melanie had been cleaning her house by the time the guest arrived, or Melanie had cleaned the house by the time the guest arrived. I will say had cleaned. Nothing because this did not happen in progress, right? He just had cleaned. Next. My brother So my brother had been apologizing before, or my brother had apologized before. I felt angry. This seems to be like a past simple. He had apologized before. I felt angry with him. What about here? So the athletes had been running around the stadium for some time before they were stopped by the coach, or the athletes had run around the stadium sometimes before they were stopped by the coach. I think it had been running because it's something that happened in progress and then they were stopped by their coach, right? So this had been happening, sorry, and then they were stopped from running by their coach. Next. So the pirates had been escaping before the rescue team arrived, or the pirates had escaped before the rescue team arrived. So if you remember, in past perfect, usually words like before, after, no, show us that it's just past perfect because it's showing an order, right? So this happened before the rescue team arrived. So this happened and then the rescue team arrived. They escaped and then the rescue team arrived. Next. The sales manager had been describing the advantages of his product for about half an hour before I agreed to buy some samples. Oh, the sales manager had described the advantages of his product for about half an hour before I agreed to buy some samples. So what do you think it is? This one, it could be both, I would say. Had been describing for an hour. No? Had been, and it's telling us the time for how long it happened. So for about half an hour. So this had been happening for 30 minutes. And then they agreed to buy something. The next one. So I had been working, no, sorry, I had been waking up before my alarm clock rang, or I had woken up before my alarm clock rang. So one thing to mention and remember here is the continuous tense. Do not use not non-action verbs, right? The continuous form for any tense, it's always going to use action verbs. So wake up, it's one action thing, right? It's not something to happen in progress. Because you wake up in a second and that's all, right? So I had woken up. I had woken up before my alarm clock rang. It's like yo he despertado, no? Before my alarm clock rang. Next one. And finally, the kids had been making a lot of mess before their mother. Their mother came back home, sorry, from work, or the kids had made a lot of mess before their mother came back home from work. So again, before, after, it's usually words to use with just past perfect tenses. So had made, the kids had made. All right, so let me show this last exercise and we're gonna take a look to this. Sorry. We're gonna take a look to this exercise. So here we have this chart that shows us the difference between just past perfect tense and past perfect continuous. So past perfect tense, the one we are talking about today is past perfect continuous, right? Past perfect is just had plus the past participle. Past perfect continuous is had been, and the form is ing for the verb because it's a continuous or a progressive tense. And this past perfect tense is going to use or be used when for an action that occurred before another action in the past. And it's usually used with a simple past tense. No? And obviously, because it's a perfect tense, we use had, no? With the past participle. So an example, I met them after they had divorced each other. No? I met them. This is just past, simple past, right? I met them after they had in the participle. They had divorced each other. Another example, I couldn't take my flight because this is also describing past, right? I couldn't take my flight because I had forgotten. I had past participle. No, I had forgotten my boarding pass. And that's the second tense is the past perfect tense, right? Now, when we see past perfect continuous, we're going to talk about an action that started in the past and continued up until another time in the past. So we usually use this with simple past tense too. And how do we make a past perfect continuous tense? We use, like I mentioned, had been, always had been, plus the verb in the I with the ing. And this is describing something that was in progress in the past, right? And it's going to happen until something else happens. A second activity, a second event in the past is going to interrupt it, or is going to be a result of. For example, Sarah had been working here for 3 weeks. So she had been working here. No? This had been, it's like a stop. No? She had been working here for 3 weeks when she had the accident. So she had been working there for three weeks, and then she had an accident. We have it that was happening until the second event, until she had the accident. And then obviously she had not been working anymore, right? She had. Richard needed a holiday because he had been working hard for 6 months. So he needed a holiday, he needed a break or vacations. Because, why? Because he had been working hard. He had been working hard for 6 months. No, that's the continuous tense. So he had been working hard, and then he decided, no, he's gonna take some vacation. Now let's see a couple of these exercises until we finish. So how can we make this sentence? It says we have to complete it with the correct form. We have to create the correct form for the verbs that we have here. No. So marry. No, we are talking about marriage. No, he married her 2 years before we met. So it's just past perfect, right? He had married her. He had married her for 2 years. Sorry, he had married her 2 years before we met. So this before, it's a time expression for past perfect. Just not in the continuous tense, not just past perfect. Let's take a look to the next one. We are seeing a time, an adverb of frequency, which is always. Another time, adverb of frequency is never, sometimes, usually, And it says, I want always to travel. And that's why I was delighted to go abroad with them. Abroad is out of your country. No? And again, it's also just past perfect. No? I past perfect had. No? I had always, and the participle for want, because the regular verb want. No? I had always wanted to travel. That's why I was delighted to go abroad with them. Delighted is um like surprised, or but it's positive, right? It's delighted. It's like happy. Number 3. She was no stranger to him. She was no stranger to him. They be introduced to each other a few days before. So they be introduced to each other a few 2 days before, and she was not a stranger to him. So this is a past perfect continuous. They had been introduced. They had been introduced each other a few days before, and she was not a stranger to him. Next one, we stay there since 1980. You know, and then we have since. And obviously it's continuous, no? Because it's saying until this moment. We had been staying. We had been staying there since 1980. You know. Until that year, no? Oh, since that year, sorry. And let's see 2 more. I stay never. I stay never in London before. So again, usually before, after, it's used with past perfect. So because it's showing this order, right? Usually. So I had, and then after had, we use the adverbs of frequency. I had never stayed is past participle of stay, right? Because it's a past, sorry, it's a regular verb. And then a question, and we will finish with this. Did I tell you that when I saw you, I realized that we met already? When I saw you, I realized that we had past perfect, right? We had, and the time expression goes before the to. We had already met, right? We had already met. So yeah, we have some exercises here. If you want to, if you need to, I can share. And we can try to finish this really quick. All right, so James told me you. No, we're talking about by. 2 years before. So not usually before, no, we use this with past perfect. You had bought, no? You had bought the old vintage, or Bobby Courage, sorry. 2 years before. I wish game had bought. We now when we mention for how long it happened, it's continuous. It had been studying. We had been studying for about half an hour, and finally, the shopkeeper same, no, for this amount of time, no, he had been and continues, no, clothes for 2 years. So no, it wasn't really that difficult. We have to understand the context, obviously, to always try to choose the correct option. No? All right, so thank you very much. I hope you understood that. If you have any